Hey y'all, it's Steve, Hobo with Wood, and this is a video showing how to use my pencil jig and where you can find it. So if you're engraving pencils, this is a great tool to have. Stick around. So if you caught last night's live stream, we talked about our pencil jigs. I had a jig. Rich, the Louisiana hobby guy, had a jig. He shared that and did some engraving in real time there on the live stream. I talked about my jig and the transformations it went through, and I actually had given my jig away already to my patrons. And one of my patrons was kind enough to just send me a message and said, hey, is this a 23 pencil jig or a 24 pencil jig? Because I had called it my 24 pencil jig and got to counting, there was only 23 pencils there. So I had to modify that and go back and correct it. Then shared the new corrected file for them because I've said it a couple of times. My files are flawless. And when you find a flaw in it, if you let me know, I will find it, fix it, correct it, and make sure that no one else has that issue. If it's a file that you paid for on hobowithwood.com, I will refund your purchase and double that amount in the way of a coupon toward future purchases on hobowithwood.com because my files are flawless. But I was intending to use my jig last night to do some live stream engraving, and I couldn't get it to work. I'm like, what's going on? My files are flawless. Why is my jig not working? It was only after the live stream it dawned on me that the file I had loaded in my LightBurn to try and do the live stream engraving was for the 24 pencil jig that I had corrected and shared with my patrons. And what I was trying to use was the 23 pencil version. So, and of course it didn't line up. So what I'm going to do now, since this is now trash, I'm going to show you how I make this, how the file works, and what you need to do to use that file, and how to prevent having the exact same problem happen to you that happened to me. Because when you cut this file out, it is pertinent that you do not change that position, that location, the design, because if you even budge it, move it, then the template you've cut out is now useless. So let's jump into LightBurn, take a look at this file, get a piece of material on the laser, and get this new template, this new jig cut out. Okay, but before we jump over here and start cutting stuff out, I'm going to show you how I set up my pencil jig, how I've got it created. That way, you get this particular file, and you decide, you know what? I don't need or I don't want 12 pencils on my jig, or 24, I only want 12. You want to modify the number, change the positions, whatever. I'm going to show you how I figure this out, how I lay it out, and then you can actually using this information, you can actually create your own without having to even bother downloading mine. So let's take a look here in LightBurn first. All right, what I have here is a toolpath, 12 by 12, because that's the material I like. That's what I use. hobowithwood.com/premium Baltic Birch. If you want the best material, in my opinion, hands down, that you can get for your diode laser bed. It is AA premium grade, good stuff. All right, I need to center my toolpath in my pencil. So let's center that up. Okay. Now, what I have here is I've put some notes around the perimeter of where my pencils are going to lay. These are notes that I can refer to anytime I grab this jig and say, oh yeah, I need to do that. So if you find that you have a personal preference, maybe edit these things and make them to fit your needs. Like for instance, I recommending using a text height of 2.2 millimeters. I recommend using all caps and bold fonts. I like the Arial font when I'm engraving pencils because it's just clean and simple. And then I take it a step further and I increase my horizontal spacing between my letters. It makes it just a little bit easier to read when you're looking at such a small font in such a small area. And I'll show you that whenever we go to lay it all out. Then when I'm using a standard yellow number 2 pencil, my settings I use are 35 millimeters a minute at 75% power using a 10-watt diode. Some folks engrave a little faster. I like the way this works. I like the depth. I like that setting for me personally when I'm engraving pencils. Now we're going to be changing this vertical Y spacing, and I'm going to show you how I configure that and how I determine what I need, and then I'll change it to be what I need it to be for this particular array and this jig. In fact, I'm going to put all these X's right here on toolpath 1. That's a red toolpath because that's the red eraser. That's where the eraser is at on the pencil. And then I've got this set up, centered up on what would be the topmost layer of the pencil. And I've got it a little away from the pencil, the eraser's edge, because this length overall is going to vary from pencil to pencil depending on the size of the barrel that they attach the eraser to that attaches to the pencil. But this typically works. But if you find you need it to be spaced further down, then all you gotta do is just select that and arrow it down left or right, depending on which way you want to move it. But let's start with setting up the actual array for 24 pencils. I did this, already shared it with my patrons, and called it a 24 count pencil jig, but it turned out I only had 23 in there and it messed up everything. I redid it for them, and then I forgot to cut out a new one and forgot to save the old one, and then my jigs I had wouldn't work anymore. So that's another heads up. If you're going to make any changes to this jig, do it before cutting anything out, obviously, and save that. And then if you find that you need to make changes or alterations to it again, this would be jig number 1. Make your alterations and changes and then save as a new file name. Do not overwrite the existing file name until you know that this is going to work for you, because that way you've at least got your original file and your original jig. Because if you overwrite that old file, then that old jig ain't going to be worth anything anymore. You follow me? Alright, so, and that's where I'm at now. That's why I'm redesigning this. I'm starting kind of from scratch, but this gives me a chance to show you how I do it. So this is the dimensions of a pencil. That toolpath is the dimensions of one edge of that hexagon shaped pencil. Now what I need to do is select that entire pencil, and I'm going to use the array tool to put 24 pencils on this 12 by 12 piece of material, or 300 by 300 piece of material. So with that selected, all of it selected, go to the array tool. I want to work in millimeters, and I wish you could change and toggle that here. You can't, so I got to say cancel, come back up here to millimeters. Now go back into the array tool, and I need to increase my row count until I get row count 24. So I don't have to keep count. I can just do it as quick as I can, as fast as my little fingers will move, until I get down to 24. There we go. That's 24 array. Now obviously that spacing is not going to work. That's entirely too much. Got it way off the piece of material. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start up here with 0, with my Y spacing at 0. And since I am set up in millimeters, and I have my arrow increment set to 1 millimeter. So every time I press the arrow key, it moves 1 millimeter. Sorry, go down, not down. Oh, sorry, start at 0, go up. There's 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters, 4 millimeters. 5 millimeters is too much. 5 millimeters is too much. And actually, my arrow increment doesn't matter here because you're just going to move it in holes, and that's in millimeters. If you were working in inches, it'd move in it, at least I think, anyway. All right, so 5 millimeters is too much. So let's look at 4. 4, I can actually got more space here. I can increase there a little bit. And what I look at is I want as much space between these pencils for a couple of reasons. One, the more space I have between the pencils means it's less likely I'm going to disturb a pencil that I've already set up in my jig when I'm laying down the next pencil. So the further distance between them, the better. 2, the further distance between them, the wider the material is between each one, making the jig, in my opinion, that's not me, it's not opinion, it's fact. It keeps it more stable. Over time, you're going to have less flexing and twisting and warping tendencies, and whenever you're handling it, it's not going to be as flimsy. So 4 was not enough. Let's look at 4.5, and that's given, and each one of my grids 5 millimeters, so that's giving me a centimeter at the bottom, and that's giving me 5, 10, 15. Let's I can change that, but let's make that 4.3, and that looks better. And that's just about trying to keep as much symmetry and stability at the same time. But that's around 4.3 millimeters. Say, okay, that works. Now that I've got that array set up, this is actually ready to be cut out. But before you cut it out, if you're going to make yourself notes on here about your Y spacing, you need to know what your Y spacing is going to be. And this is the array settings for my vertical Y spacing for my text. And I probably could rename that text array vertical spacing. Probably will. All right, so what do I mean by that? I'm going to set up a text in here, and I already know that I want to use 2.2 millimeters, so I'm going to say 2.2 millimeters. I'm going to use my Arial font, and I'm going to put in some text. Hobo, all caps. Turn on my cap lock so I ain't got to hold it. Hobo with wood. Put that on the black layer to double alt. What did you just do? Undo that. Select just that text and put that on the black layer. There we go. Now let's hold my shift key, select that toolpath, tell it to align center and align left. Now that's put it in the center of that toolpath and to the left edge of that toolpath. And now when you zoom out and look at that pencil, you can see that Hobo with wood's kind of small and it's all bunched up down there at the end. So as I said, I like using all caps and bold fonts. So let's increase that to bold right there underneath the font option, making it bold. It's already a little easier to see. But now come over here to your H spacing, your horizontal spacing. And we're going to increase our spacing between the letters. And this right here, add space or remove between characters horizontally, H space, horizontal. Now, we're going to increase it 1, 2, 3, and if you just watch, in fact, we'll zoom in really tight on it. We're going to see what looks good. Because you can just hold that down. Now you see it's starting to get a little tough to read the further you get them spaced apart. So you don't want to go too crazy with it. You want to keep it, nice to look at, nice to the eye. And just 10. 10 H space looks good for me. Now, what is 10? If I recall correctly, 10 is a percentage of the height of the font Somebody just bought something on hobowithwood.com. Thank you. Thank you for your purchase. All right. So Hobo with Wood is 2.2 millimeters. And this 10, I think, is 10% of 2.2 millimeters additional space between the fonts. So in this case, it would be, what, 0.22 millimeters additional space between each of the letters. I think that's what that is. The actual value of what it is kind of irrelevant because you're just basing it off what looks good. So that looks good to me there. Now I need to hold my shift key and select that font or that toolpath again, and I'm going to double check it. Since I told it to go bold, I'm going to make sure it's in center and see it moved. And now tell it to align. So check your alignment after you make any changes to your font. So I recentered it and left justified it. Now I need to find out what the spacing needs to be to get it to go from here to here and look good. So if I zoom in nice and tight where I can see those, and I select that font, and I come back to my array tool, and I tell it I want to do 2 rows, we can see that's not enough. So all I've got to do is come over here to my Y spacing. It's showing 4.3 now because that's what we used on the pencils. But that don't work here. So I'm going to start increasing my Y spacing. In fact, we're going to make it whole numbers here. Go into 5. All right, let's go to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 is too much. So if I go back to 9 and say 9.5, not enough. Backspace of 1, 9.6, not really enough. 9.7. 9.7, actually, if I look down here, let's look at 9.72. All right, that looks, I actually go 9.71. All right, that looks pretty good. Say okay. Actually, I'm not even going to say okay. I got those centered up. I can see right here I've got a count of 2. If I want to give it a count of 24, just going to keep hitting that arrow up button until I get to count 24. So that should be okay now, right? Because that's centered and that's centered. That looks good. Let's see what we got. No, see, that didn't work. And the reason that didn't work is because it was not quite perfect, and by the time you got all the way down here to the 24th version, it had exaggerated that so much that it no longer looks good. So when you're setting up your array, you do not want to set it up with the one closest to it. What you want to do, in fact, I'm just going to hold my shift button and select my black layer. Then I'm going to zoom in up here and hold my control button and select this one, and that will deselect that. All the rest of them are selected. I can now say delete, and they're all gone. So what I need to do is I need to select that, go to my array tool, and now with my array tool selected, I'm going to come all the way down here to the bottom one. And now I know that 971 didn't work, but I'm going to go ahead and tell it, I can actually, instead of using my arrow, I'm just going to tell it 24. Boom, there we go. There's 24 versions of that. And now I can see where that 24th version would be. And now I can start dialing that in. 9.7. Nope. 9.6. 9.6 is not enough. 9.65 is not enough. 7. That looks pretty darn good right there. It's actually a little low right here compared to that. So let's go 9.66. Not enough. So 6, 5, 8. You see what I'm doing here is I was at tenths, hundredths. Now I'm working in 1,000th of a millimeter to move that. So at 9.668, 9.669. All right, looking at that just by the eyeball without using a measuring tool, that looks like that's closer to that. So let's go back to 9.668. And also a tip, don't look at rounded fonts. Look at fonts with a flat edge on them. And that looks pretty close to me. I think it's a kind of a toss between those two. That's closer, but you know, we're talking about tenths, hundredths, thousandths of a millimeter. I think that's going to work at 9.668. Let's zoom out and go all the way back up here to the top. Now zoom in and let's check. All right, see, that looks good there. All right, those all look good. So now I need to remember that Y spacing and make my changes up here. 9.668 for this array. Say OK. Now I'm going to select my font. 9.668. 9.668 is my text. Turn my cap locks off. Text array settings. Okay. All right. I'm going to change this to simply use all caps. Let's turn that cap locks back on. Use all caps. Comma. Bold font. And increase H space. Okay. Now, top left corner, text array settings. This is just a note, hey, your eraser's on this end, because these are not going to engrave. These are all just tool paths. When you cut this out, there's nothing going to be nothing there but an open slot. And you'll butt your eraser right up to the end of that open slot. And I'll show you that when we get it all cut out. All right. Now what I'm going to do for grins and giggles, I'm going to select all that text, move it over here out of the way. I'm going to select all this text, move it out of the way. Oh, I got a pencil. Didn't want to get a pencil. Undo that. Move that out of the way. And for now, I'm going to select all of that. I'm going to group it. And then I'm going to hold my shift key, select my toolpath, and tell it to go to center. There we go. Wasn't quite there. Now it's perfectly centered. It's going to make it its most possible, give it its most possible stability. I can put that back in the top left there just so that everybody knows when they're working with it, that's its orientation. Bring this over, and we're going to hold my shift key, select the toolpath, and tell it to align on the center. This is all about just making it look pretty. And I'm going to bring that down a little bit. In fact, I don't even need that word text. I don't need the settings. Text array. There we go. So we'll just do that and get rid of the settings. Okay. In fact, I'll do, and this is just me being ridiculous. Center that to there. That looks good. Now let's bring these two, align those to center. Not like that, stupid. Undo. Group them. No, don't need to group them with the toolpath. Group those two. Select the toolpath and align center. And now use my arrow keys to bring those down in position. Okay. And now my 24 jig. I can make that a little bit bigger. Actually, you know what? I can make that bold. Go to text. What's going on there? Text. Bold. Nope, that didn't work. Can I select it and do it that way? Nope. Alright, we don't worry about thinking that right now. Alright, but I am going to, yeah, because that looks like that's bold and this is not. And this is just me being crazy. So we're just going to say, I'm going to delete that. I'm going to do 24 count. I forgot. Come on, stupid. And okay, I'm happy with that now. Now what I need to do, since all that Hobo with wood was just what I needed to do to configure the array and spacing in the setting, I'm going to hold my shift button and select that black layer, delete all of that, select that and delete that. There we go. Now I'm ready to cut and engrave this out. So let's set up the priorities are good. Let's check our library. Let's check our engraving. We'll do light and assign that to there. Let's see, it's 3055. Assign to layer. Okay, and then cut. I like the cuts. Okay. Now that job is ready to go to the laser. Now I am using the Lasermatic 10 from Rolly Automation. It has a honeycomb bed that has a fixed position in the machine, and it's going to be in that same position every single time. The honeycomb, it has a very small tolerance of movement, so you can get it in and out. But if you just take that, I personally take it and shove it all the way up into that left corner. That's not going to move. It's going to stay where it's at. Now I can take my 12 by 12 material and do the same thing to it on the honeycomb. Put it on the honeycomb and all the way up into the left corner of that honeycomb. Just like you see I have it pictured here. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and say save. I'm going to save this file. Now that overwrote anything that I had in here and with that file name. But now that I've got this set up, I've got the notes made, everything is right for this particular file. I've got a piece of material all the way oriented all the way up in there. I'm not going to cut anything out around the perimeter of that. The perimeter of that 12 by 12 is what it is, and it's going to stay that way. There's no need for me to cut out a perimeter. So what I'm going to do with that wedged all the way up in the left corner, I'm going to send this job to this material as is. Then when I take it off and reposition it again as needed, every time I use it, I'm going to put it right back in that same spot, and I'll be within a fraction of a millimeter of where it needs to be. So let's get this cut out. Then I'm going to show you what you need to do to make changes to this template in order to engrave your pencils. So let's jump over to the laser and get things going. Now, something else that I recommend doing. I'm just now powering the laser up. Make sure if you don't have your laser set to go to home on power up, first thing you should do is home your laser. In fact, what I do, I think it might be in home right now, I don't know. But for giggles, I'll turn on my pin over there for my laser controls and drop a pin for my laser. It's not letting me. Oh, I got to turn on. I've got the wrong COM port. Let's get the right COM port. COM port 6 is selected. Laser shows ready, and it just tried to go home. But I'm going to go here, and I'm going to select any random position. Send that laser out. And the reason I'm doing this is because precision is, it's all about precision when you're trying to use this jig. So you need to start from a very known position every single time you use this jig, or any jig. But it really only comes into play if you started from there to begin with. And this is the beginning of this jig, is cutting it out. So now that it's in some random position, now I'm going to send it to home. The Lasermatic 10 has limit switches, so that should be in that position every time it goes back there, unless you fiddle with the switches. Now that that's done, and with the Lasermatic, I don't have to frame anything, I don't have to do anything. That's in its home position. I'm just going to select all of this, check my priority on my levels. I've already checked all my settings, everything looks good. So now I'm just going to say start. Going to go and do all. What is that engraving? Oh, that's engraving the D. Something don't look right. Yeah, we're not using op. Nope, we got the. LightBurn crashed on me, it screwed everything up. So we're going to stop this, hit stop. My origin was messed up. So I seen it, but I didn't recognize it. My origin's right there in the middle. LightBurn just crashed on me and it screwed up my settings. So let's go back to the laser. I want my origin to be up here in the top left. I missed that. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this to home. So you get to see screw ups and all. In fact, there's something else I need to do. I'm just going to flip this over because all that was doing was beginning to engrave. I've got everything's shoved that top left corner. I need to focus. I've been engraving pencils. I need to lower my focus point. So let's send this anywhere up here in the wood. And let's set our focus. Now that we've got the focus set, we've got our origin set. We're using the Comgrow. No, we're not using the Comgrow. We're using the Lasermatic 10. That thing screwed up my. I've hardly ever had this thing crash. All right, so that's got to go to the top left corner. There we go. We're on our Lasermatic 10. We're on the right COM port. User origin and we're using absolute coordinates. Absolute coordinates. There we go, and that way it doesn't matter about the origin. Absolute coordinates. The right laser, the right COM port. Now I'm going to rehome it again since it was, and moving it out is really probably not necessary, but I like to get all that, some random motion going on here. Now send it to home. That way it activates both of the limit switches. Now that I've got the right laser selected and the right positions selected, the right focus selected, I should be able to select all of that and tell it to start. And that looks so much better. Alright, we're going to let this thing do its job and we'll come back to you in a second. Okay, so my video is running long, as they typically do, but they're usually filled with a wealth of information. And those that watch it straight through, they learn something. And those that jump around, they don't see the value in it, but that's because they don't watch the thing. So we have a completed jig, and I'm going to end this video here. And I'm going to make another video showing how I set up those arrays, and then and how to work with this jig when it's time to lay out that font, and make sure you're only sending to the job what you need to, and you don't mess up your jig. So another video coming, and I'll probably even touch on virtual arrays in that video. That came up in the live stream, and I've done them, been a while, but we'll refresh myself and you with virtual arrays and how you can use those with the jig and a template. So until the next video, if you found this video helpful, that super thanks down there is just staring at you, asking you to go ping, ping, ping. If you haven't joined up on Patreon, patreon.com/hobowithwood, your support would be greatly appreciated. There's always hobowithwood.com, where you'll find this file for sale along with the actual pencil box that we showed on Laser Maker's Realm, and there is an assembly video on my YouTube channel for that as well. That is a very complex build, and if you're going to be doing a bunch of pencils, that's a really nice accessory to have to put your pencils in. So hang around, or not, don't hang around, but stay tuned for the next video showing how to do that text, how to use the jig without messing up your files, and virtual arrays. We'll do those two. All right, so until the next video, I'm Steve, Hobo with Wood, and I'm out.